Okay, we're almost at 5 after here, so I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. I'm your host, Shelley Mann, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Zia Consulting. In today's webinar, we have Matt Vanore, an Enterprise Sales Director at Zia Consulting, and he's going to share how enterprise automation can accelerate business processes and increase gross margin in the staffing industry. Matt brings over 10 years of experience working in the staffing industry and is deeply familiar with the challenges that people face, as well as the benefits that automation can bring to every department in a staffing firm. Before we begin, I would like to encourage you to submit any comments or questions that you have in the chat function, and we will get to those at the end of the webinar in the Q&A session. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, your presenter today.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. Appreciate you setting this up today and looking forward to speaking with everybody. Again, this has been something I've been really excited about, and to share my expertise from the staffing industry and what I've learned at Zia and really the correlation between them. So if you could share the slideshow, I'd love to get started, and
all right,
please get started there, but I think it's going to be a great time. All right. And then I'll start out just as Shelley did, kind of giving a bio. And as Shelley alluded to, I have 10 years of experience in the staffing industry. I worked in leadership functions within both the commercial and professional staffing side, and really saw things from many perspectives, gained insights, and loved my time in the industry. It was good to me financially, professionally, growth, met some of the best people I've ever met. And ultimately, like many people in 2021, I was part of the Great Reset and the great shift to looking for new industries and new purpose. And I joined Zia Consulting for the ability to sell complex solutions and be part of selling large enterprise software, and was just blown away by the similarities and the ability to improve the staffing industry. And I just kept seeing the patterns over and over again. And I thought at first it was just something I was just part of because, hey, it was 10 years of my life. Of course, I'm going to see it. But as we go into more solutions today and give more overview of some of the topics I'd like to speak on, my hope for all of you is that you start to see the intuitive nature of how I think these solutions can benefit the industry, and not just potentially consider the solutions that I'm going to propose, but think from an intuitive standpoint of what they can do on your own for your unique situation. Go to the next slide, please. I want to start out first by just giving a brief overview of Zia. As I mentioned, I made a big career change, leaving a leadership role in the staffing industry to join Zia, and I want to make sure you guys understand kind of what I'm doing now and how I think potentially it can help the audience that's attending today. Zia is a system integrator and reseller of technology specifically around content. We work with a variety of best-in-breed software partners and have an expert architect level ability to implement software and implement solutions and ultimately satisfy our customers and meet them where they're at. From a design point of what we do, we can help with a variety of projects, typically around digital transformation or modernization. And those could be efforts from just giving you a simple assessment, migrating content, retiring legacy systems, or ultimately just getting a better use of the technology you have and making them seamlessly work together while potentially also building something better for you. And to kind of kick off today, we're here because we want to talk about staffing. I want to first kind of level set on kind of where I see the industry now, where it's going, and then ultimately how we get through the next decade to ultimately set up another golden age for staffing. As we know, staffing really reached a zenith last year, finally approaching and eclipsing the 2% level of temporary utilization rate. And for comparison, as we know, it was 1% in 1990, and we know this trend is exponential in other markets. In the EU, we're averaging over 10% utilization rate. In Japan, it's 15%. As regulation goes in this country, as the gig economy is here to stay, I think we're going to continue to see exponential growth, and with that comes exponential pressure to continue to grow based on your model if you're scaling up or if you're an industry leader and reporting to shareholders. So from that, I want to kind of go on of some of the segments of the industry and where I think different solutions fit. As I explained, I worked in both the commercial and professional staffing industry. On the commercial side, as we know, it's speed. It's about volume. It's about how can you create a process that's quicker, more efficient, and ultimately more seamless. On the professional side of staffing, typically in verticals such as IT or engineering, it's cognitive. It's how can I find a better resource? How can I offer a more consultative approach to why a resource should leave a job when ultimately there are two skilled jobs for every skilled worker? And then, as we know, the model is broken up between staff augmentation, managed services, and direct hire. I imagine most of the audience on this call, like this segment, is in the staff augmentation world. But what I saw in the decade in the industry is that, search was coming back. Obviously, as unemployment was getting lower, there was the opportunity to generate those fees. And most of the industry leaders were looking for an ability to have some type of consulting practice or managed services with some type of scope and deliverable to offset and leverage their staff augmentation model. And then if we could move on to some of kind of the state of the industry. This is an insight I developed in the industry, and it was just the story behind the story of staffing. We all know from working in this industry that it's speed to market. It's how quick can I get a candidate out? How can I beat the competition? And to me, the question was always why? Like, why is there so much speed? Because it's such an important and essential part of the economy. But speed, in my opinion, and the operation at which the industry moves from a manual process standpoint is what burns most people out. And the why behind that is the financing and capital required to make the staffing industry work. Typically, if you're a smaller regional size firm, you're borrowing money or capital at a certain interest rate, and obviously, your gross margin has to exceed that, and that's how you create the profit in the industry. If you're a fully mature and scaled organization, you may be self-funding, but as we know, anything can happen, and the market isn't stable, and the world isn't stable. The world stood still in 2020, as we all know what we went through with COVID, and I can remember being based in Central Florida, running a market leader professional staffing organization that staffed top level resources at the most well-known theme parks and hospitality clients in the market. Our revenue dropping 50% in 1 month. And I thought about it specifically how it affected me from a revenue standpoint and what it meant for my team. But as I take a step back and peel back the onion of how the industry works, it's a much different story if you're thinking about where the funding and the story behind the funding comes. And if we look at where the world is now with interest rates and the cost of borrowing, this problem behind the problem is something that we have to address, and it's the elephant in the room. And in my opinion, technology is the way to not only optimize that, but to actually make the industry better. Next slide, please. As I alluded to earlier, some of the issues facing the market today, and this isn't news to anybody. For the decade I was in the industry, we talked about the war for talent, and it always felt a bit like a marketing or a sales strategy to speed up an interview process. But when the unemployment rate was 6% compared to 9%, we really felt it. When it dropped down to 3% in 2019, and continues to be at levels it hasn't been at in 50 years. It truly is a different world we're living in right now when it comes to how we operate. Sales is, a different job than it was. Instead of when I got into the industry, if you had a job order, you celebrated. When I exited the industry, it was, we have too many job orders. We can't fill these jobs. There's dissatisfaction among people in the industry. Wage inflation and macroeconomic cycle obviously has its pros and cons. For driving margin, obviously that's a good thing. But for capital, it has to go out the door, not only to pay your internal employees, but also to pay and advance the salaries of the people that you have on assignment. It's ever important to be making sure that side of the equation is worked out. And then there's the compliance, the ever-changing labor law. In my time in the industry, we saw the Affordable Care Act change the industry rapidly. We saw what happened with COVID. We saw the constant changes that are continuing to be proposed in Washington. And I think that's going to continue. And I think the way businesses are going to potentially protect their margins in all sectors is to lean more on temporary staffing. And we're going to have to make sure that we're there for them. But at the same time, we're also going to have to make sure we're compliant. And that's where depending on manual processes rather than having this as an automated governance practice will ultimately set you up more for success and mitigate your risk. And oh yeah, there's AI. As we know this year, it feels like with ChatGPT, this is just the beginning, and nobody really knows what's coming. But I think if we look at this as an opportunity to, establish and reestablish our positions in the market and potentially disrupt, there will be new leaders in this industry in 10 years based on the moves we're making now. And I think it's an exciting time to be in the industry, and I welcome the ability to support it in a different way. And I'm excited to talk more about that as we get into our discussions today. So I want to take it now to the perspective of the employees that are generating your revenue. Most of the people invited on this call are in upper management or in high-level IT positions. So this may seem intuitive, but it also is probably something that you are not used to on a day-to-day basis. And I want to share the perspective of what my employees told me for the past 10 years, what they liked about the roles, what they didn't, and ultimately, as they were doing exit interviews, what we could have done to prevent it. And I think this is a unique opportunity for our industry to reflect and make work better. So from the perspective of a sales or account manager, we know why we hire them. We hire them because they are expert relationship builders. They have excellent judgment, and they know intuitively how to ask the right questions in order to have a competitive advantage to find a more appropriate resource for their position. Now, what are they actually doing day to day? They're constantly rushing to put job orders in the system. They're constantly scrubbing resumes and doing manual work to make sure it presents well to a client. They're constantly doing internal processes for a workflow that should be automated, but is highly manual. And it's at an alarming rate. And the more dissatisfying thing is, though ultimately the way they can show their key performance indicators is all of the manual work that they have to input. And that's what burns people out. I've never heard someone say from the sales perspective, I'm leaving this job because I just don't like taking customers out to dinner or lunch. I just don't like changing someone's life for the better and giving them a more meaningful career. They tell you they're burned out because of the manual processes and the breakness and repetitiveness of those processes. From the recruiting perspective, one of the common themes of a well-adjusted, happy recruiter that is being successful and achieving their metrics are they love making an impact. They love feeling like they are part of the solution and that they are literally helping people change their lives and ultimately getting paid to do the right thing. But then you look at what we have them doing. They're blasting hundreds of emails a day, racing to get in the office to be the first one to complete the manual processes. They're texting, they're creating candidate profiles. They are essentially doing work of a data entry specialist at a record pace and being told they're not doing it fast enough. And that's the work that gets measured on KPI reports. And the things that are intuitive, that we are high level, are consultative, are hard to be measured, but they ultimately count. And what we're hiring people for, they're not doing, and they're leaving for the things that are the unintended consequences of the current process. And I'll go to the next slide now and show you where kind of how that causes effect. Ultimately, because sales is working at a record pace and things aren't automated, there's more error. And what does that mean? That means potentially wrong information is inputted in systems, and that creates a suboptimal onboarding and customer service experience. For all the work we do to work a candidate through an interview process, getting an offer accept, helping them put in notice for their current job, ultimately, there's no revenue there. The revenue comes in from when we actually get them inputted in our system and they work their first hour for a customer, so then we can bill them. So if you look at what's closest to the money, onboarding and customer service is some of the most value-added and low-hanging fruit problems that we can solve. And if we overlook them, we'll continue to have an industry-wide perception of, we're just a body shop, or we're just throwing people at you, or you'll have dissatisfied contractors that feel like my staffing company doesn't care about me, or, just sent me out to a place and I wasn't prepared. I didn't know where to go or who to meet. And these are all things that are very easily to fix and scalable and can make a big competitive advantage. On the flip side, let's go even closer to the money. If data and content is inputted incorrectly because there's a rushed process and there's KPIs that are driving this bad behavior, you're going to have billing and collection and AR challenges. I remember when I made the jump from professional staffing to commercial staffing, I looked for wedges and differentiators, and ultimately we were filling high volume roles, and we were trying to get hundreds of people to show up for events, and they were low paid roles, and there was very little way to differentiate. And I remember a senior vice president that I respected at the time said, one of the easiest ways to wedge is, ask about billing problems and ask about time card problems and ask about payroll challenges, because every single company has these. And if you poke enough, you'll be able to differentiate and give yourself a way in. And while that was a fun sales technique, why not solve the problem? And that's something that we're going to talk a little more about today as we continue to keep going. So as we kind of look about the theme about what we're going to talk about, we're going to really talk about two subjects. The first is hyperautomation, and I'll outline what that is. And then the second is RPA solutions. But before we get into those, I want to talk about what we're seeing kind of industry-wide across the spectrum. While we don't necessarily focus just on the staffing industry, we have some other target verticals. We do get a broad approach to the economy. And what we're seeing is that projects that are getting approved now are providing ROI. They're making employment better for the employees. They're making it so that if you have a redundant manual process job, that we're either moving people up to a better job where they'll find more meaning, or moving them out. Because truthfully, keeping the process the way it is, it's risk for you, and it's a dissatisfied employee. It's a recipe that's not sustainable. And ultimately, the solutions that we're going to discuss today, I believe, will give a better understanding of what's possible. And that's a theme we want to talk about. So when we're talking about hyperautomation, how do you define hyperautomation? There's lots of ways to, think about what that means, and there's lots of buzzwords. But at Zia, we define hyperautomation as a business-driven, disciplined approach that organizations use to rapidly identify, vet, automate as many business and IT processes as possible. In simple terms, look at your process and see if there is a way to do it better. If there's tasks that are low value added, look for the opportunity to automate it. That is a theme that we're going to keep hitting and looking at from a functional standpoint as we continue to go through this process. I want to show a visualization of that on the next slide that I think really hits home of what's possible in our industry. So I'm going to take us out of the staffing industry for a moment and look at insurance and see if we can compare and create some analogies here. In the insurance world, it's funny how every industry is different, but if you really look at it, there's so much similarities. There's sales and account managers just like there are in the staffing world. But rather than having to partner with somebody on their delivery to ultimately find a resource, an insurance sales professional has to work with an underwriter. And ultimately, their role is to analyze risks and set an appropriate rate so that the insurance company can achieve their profit goals. And that obviously, the risk and reward balance is there. So when you think about what you hire an underwriter for, you're hiring them for their analytical mind, for their ability to see between the dots, to connect the gray, to see ultimately what's a good risk and what's a bad risk, and it's not always black and white. So we analyzed and looked at how an underwriter spent their day, and less than 20% of their day was spent on the role that they were actually hired for. And when profitability metrics weren't being met, we thought about that. We're like, what if we could change that? What if we could, flip this script? And, the results of some of the solutions that we proposed were that over 70% of an underwriter's day was now spent doing the role that they were actually hired for. And tasks such as, manual setup, data entry, just, sorting through various systems to find the information you need was either more integrated or more automated. And think about that if you have a recruiter right now. Imagine if you could change this output. Because while I can't say they correlate one-to-one, I'm certain that if you sat down with your top recruiters and honestly got them to disclose to you how much of their day was not spent on high value added opportunities, you'd be shocked. And again, think art of the possible. Think what's possible if you could move the needle to have an exponential result like we're presenting here. And that's something that I hope to accomplish with you all in the future. Now, the next thing I want to get to is talking about RPA, robotic process organization. To start out, this is not a This is not a brand new subject in the staffing world, but it is something that is emerging. Based on the latest research I did, only 18% of staffing firms have begun an RPA initiative, and some have had suboptimal results. Some have thought it to be a silver bullet. But again, I want to talk through it and see if we can, get a better understanding of what's possible. Simply stated, what an RPA solution can do is it can automate manual processes and provide immediate cost savings. It can lower your risk. A very underrated benefit is provide relief for your employees and increase the speed at which you process information. The staffing industry is a very structured, repeatable process. And while there is some levels of automation and there has been technology improvements over the years, it has operated pretty frequently the same manner for the past 50 years. And obviously that changed with some disruption, but I think the disruption that's coming is going to have more change in this next decade than there has probably been in 20 or 30 years. So I'd like to kind of show and speak to that a little more. Think about staffing for a role, but again, take a step back and see if this rings a bell for you. When we evaluate customers across industries on what is an ideal fit for RPA, we look for a few key things. Do they have highly repeatable tasks that need to be performed manually? That checks the box for staffing for me. Do you have a business process that requires high transaction volume to scale? That's staffing 101. Like, how do you grow? You increase your submittals. What will that net in? More placements, how will that more revenue, et cetera. The cycle works its way up, but it's an activity business. Traditionally, the way you scale is you bring in more recruiters or salespeople than you need. And unfortunately, a lot of them flush out, and it creates this endless cycle of training and developing and having low retention rates. And just ultimately you get the growth you need, but it's a painful way to grow. And what if there was a better way? High processing time for optimal results. You have to work fast. As we mentioned, the industry leverage is ultimately what drives that. And do you have rules and a systematic process in place? And that, if you look at the staffing roadmap and if you break down tasks, A has to come before B and C, all the way to get to a placement, all the way to get to an offer accept, all the way to actually getting a place to get a resource to start their assignment. So it just was light bulb for me of how has this not happened yet, and a genuine excitement of what's possible as we continue to show you what we can do with RPA technology. So everything I've been saying now has been concepts. It has been theories. Now I'd like to take it a little more to the application level. What can RPA actually do? Like, I get it, it's the silver bullet, it's great, but what are the things that my employees can actually be relieved from? And let's talk through them. I won't read everything on here, but I'll try to read the things that I think make the most sense for the industry. Open mail attachments. So for instance, if you have a VMS job order coming in and it's sitting in somebody's inbox because they're on vacation, or any traditional job order, it could just be an email that gets sent in from a hiring manager that's flagged. How does that get in your system now? An employee has to open their email. They have to copy and paste it into your applicant tracking system or CRM tool, and then go through a list of manual processes to actually start sourcing a candidate. Imagine if you could do that quicker. Logging into another software application. Again, having to log into a VMS, a Workforce Logic, et cetera, type tool takes time. And if an account manager is on the road and traveling, they're not doing what you're actually paying them for if they're doing this type of work. Moving files and folders. Ask a sourcer or an entry-level recruiter how much time they spent just setting up candidate profiles and creating many profiles. It's daunting. And again, as you can see, the rest is pretty intuitive. But it can do manual, repeatable processes. It can learn a structured process for you. And the key is a structured, repeatable process. The more you can have structured, the more you can have automation. So again, think art of possible, and start connecting the dots here as you analyze your current business processes, and push for standardization so that you can ultimately, leverage the power of RPA technology. This is a visualization. And again, this is, I think, the true value of Zia. If all that happens today from our conversation is you buy into RPA technology and, you go reach out to a vendor directly, that's great. That's a win for the industry, and I'm happy for you. Where I think Zia really has the value is we can see how it integrates to a much bigger picture to give you an optimal process. So while I won't walk you through every detail of this, think about it that it really all starts from digitizing content. If I have a paper resume or if I have a resume sitting in an email folder, until that is put into a system of record that ultimately can create a process, it's really content or data that's not necessarily helping me. But if you can use an intelligent capture tool that ultimately can identify what type of document is this, and then two, what is the meaningful insights on this piece of paper, I can create a digitized version of that document, which is now moved into a BPM or workflow tool, and have an RPA tool sit on top of it that can automate processes based on your specific use case or business need, and then move it through a process and automate the tasks that necessarily don't need humans input, and directly put it in the hands of the appropriate party. And when the content is then and the business processes have been complete, be digitally archived and stored so that you're meeting all of your compliance needs. And then the best part, have meaningful insights for data analysis or future AI initiatives in the future. So in summary of what's possible with RPA, you can improve the scale that you can grow and the agility of what's possible. Traditionally, if I were to bring in a big project that required us to hire 100 people in 2 weeks, how would we do that? We'd be scrambling. We'd be having to take resources from other markets, having to hire at a lightning pace, and just throw people into the deep end. On the flip side, if you have a situation where your biggest customer lays off all of their contingent staff, you typically have to scale down very quickly, and that's a very painful process. If you're getting more value out of the top resources that you have, they will be happier. They will work harder and earn more money for you. And ultimately, you'll have the right employees in the right seat and be in a position to continue to elevate the people that you want to elevate within your industry, and be able to get more done with less, or on the contrary, be able to give a better work-life balance that's maybe not possible in the current business model right now. So again, a lot of things that I think are a net positive for the industry, and how it will continue to evolve and grow. So there's so much I could go as far as examples of how to get started. I've just started with 3 of them. There's probably 50 off the top of your head from going through this exercise with me that you're thinking of right now. But I wanted to start with some just examples of low-hanging fruit. So one of the things that I think absolutely needs to improve is we have to automate parts of the sourcing process. As I outlined above, if you look at what a typical sourcer does, they're racing to get into the office to blast out mass emails and texts. They are constantly doing Boolean search strings. Half of the time, they haven't even been trained on how to do it correctly. So there are so many good candidates that are getting missed, and the wrong candidates are getting called. And it creates this endless cycle of, oh, another recruiter's calling me. They don't know what they're doing. Why am I picking up the phone call? Bad for your brand, bad for the employee in the office. So what can we do? Like, what's different about that? Is that just the way it is and something that we have to live with? Or is there a way to leverage some of the technology I mentioned above to get a more optimal experience? And I think there is, and I'll just kind of high level present that as a concept on the next slide. What we recommend is using a combination of document capture and RPA to ultimately kickstart processes, so that as an account manager puts in their jobs the night before, and frankly, you could even, as I'll talk earlier, you have an RPA process do that for you. As soon as a job is in your system, you have a set of scripted questions going out. And from there, using an RPA technology, using an if this then logic, if 5 certain set of qualifications are met or answered by a candidate, you could have a chatbot initiate another step, and then ultimately have your high level resources coming into the office the next morning, already having interviews scheduled and coordinated for them, so that the people that you're hiring to source are actually sourcing, and providing more value to the appropriate candidates, and not wasting ample amounts of time, to use an industry term, herding cats. So another thing that I think is beginning to happen, but it's still in its infancy, is manual or automating the recruiter workflow process. So much of a recruiter's day is just simply putting in candidate notes. It's moving candidates through stages. It's actually, rather than talking and consulting with a candidate, it's sending them emails, it's sending them reminders. Imagine if we could automate that and actually provide the value of a recruiting role of, I'm giving you valuable insights on what this company does. This is what will make this hiring manager feel that you are a differentiated candidate. Instead, they don't have the time to do that. And unfortunately, the candidates that, are doing, or the recruiters that are doing that, typically aren't meeting internal and compliance and KPI metrics. And it becomes this endless cycle of, do you reward good behavior or bad behavior? And if you're having your revenue generating resources doing manual tasks, in my opinion, it will continue to upset the apple cart. And there's just such a better way by leveraging, business process management tools and RPA technology. And again, as I stated, the kind of the theme behind the solution is, what is a recruiter doing that drives value? What are they doing that's high level? Let's have them do more of that. What tasks can we automate and take away? So for example, can we automate scheduling and coordinating interviews? Can we automate reminder best practices for interviews? Can we automate a process for, okay, as soon as your interview is done, let's have an automated debrief call scheduled? So much of that is taxing for a recruiter to do now, that it either doesn't get done and creates a suboptimal experience, or they're spending their time doing things that can be automated and ultimately burning themselves out. So we'd like to avoid that. And then a final, and by final, there's so many more, but just I didn't want to spend the whole time, posturing up solutions for it. I wanted to give you some of the low-hanging fruit that I thought we could do right now. Is automating job postings. I can't tell you how much time and how much frustration it was for account managers to feel so excited to call me up on their cell phone and say, I had this great meeting with XYZ customer. They've emailed me everything, but it's going to take me 3 or 4 hours to get back to the office, input all of this information, and ultimately, delay the process of recruiting. And it's just, I'd have this sad realization that, okay, we've already lost then, because if it's going to take you that long, there's some other competitor that's already doing it quicker and faster. And it's a, you don't want to take the wind out of somebody's sails. A salesperson is doing the job you're hiring them for, but because of not having integrated systems, because of not having an automation solution that can work faster and ultimately provide value quicker, you're seeing suboptimal results in a deflated person that ultimately could exit the industry. So one of the quickest and lowest hanging fruits I think that's there is, as you're already seeing a structured job come from a VMS or an MSP, quickly integrate with RPA and intelligent capture to have their jobs be ultimately moved into your system automatically, posted automatically, and then have a sourcing process attached to that. So there's so much that you can do with this, that it's really your level of imagination, your level of commitment, and your level of differentiation. And the great thing is, especially working with a firm like Zia, is you have the opportunity to build your solution. There's not many people yet that are selling off the shelf solutions like this. So your ability to build and work with a firm like ours will allow you to build your own competitive advantage in your local or national market. And I wanted to kind of start here showing that one of the things that I really like about Zia is we're going to meet you where you are. And I had mentioned earlier that, we have a 95% success rate with our customers. And that's not an accident. It really comes down to, how we operate and having a fail-proof methodology. The first thing we're always going to do when we work with you is we're going to be honest. We're going to meet you where you are. We're going to do an assessment, and we're going to find the most optimal way to give you the highest ROI in the quickest time. Something that Zia prides itself on is, what is the right combination of finding low effort, high impact opportunities. And if we can provide you ROI quickly, we can build momentum. Typically, when we see RPA initiatives or really any type of initiatives that don't succeed and don't get buy-in, it's because they don't get ROI quick enough. Too much was overpromised on the front end, and it just sets you down a death spiral. And we try to avoid that and try to create long-term engagements that ultimately is set in stone based on the way we operate. And to kind of conclude, I wanted to give you access to some pretty in-depth, blog white papers I wrote on some of the subjects today. Feel free to, everyone that's on this call will be getting this webinar. Feel free to read these. These are also on our website. I think you'll find them interesting. And the more I keep writing about the subject, the more I keep researching on the subject, the more it's just, if there was ever an industry where the solution was meant for, the staffing industry fits it to a T. So I encourage you to read them, and it may inspire you to optimize some of your current processes and look for opportunities to continue to grow your organization. And this is kind of just our conclusion slide. Want to make sure you know how to get in contact with us. My personal email's on here, Zia website's here, my cell is on here. So if there's anything that you found useful in this discussion or would like to go deeper, or you'd like me to bring a technical resource to approach it from a different perspective, would very much welcome that. Everything I talked about today was really on a concept level, about art of the possible. Would love to meet you where you're at and see if we can have more of these discussions based on where your digital transformation journey is at this time. And
all right.
Really thank you for your
Go
time.
ahead.
No, that's it. Just grateful for everyone's time today. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, this is fantastic information, Matt. Thank you so much for sharing. I do have a few questions that have come in, so let me move over to the chat function here.
Sure.
One of our questions is, how do I sell this to my internal employees who might be fearing that they're going to lose their job to some kind of automated process?
That's a great question and something we hear often. I would say radical honesty. I would say if you are effective at your job now, you will be much more effective. You will make more money. You will be more satisfied. And ultimately, you will be elevated. If you are barely hanging on by a thread, this may be the thing that pushes you out, and that's a good thing. Go find something where you can be more valuable. But I would say honesty and candor. I think if you try and paint a picture that it's not going to be disruptive and it's not going to change, you're doing them a disservice, but you're also not letting them see what's possible from it as well.
Yeah, great answer. Another one of our questions here is an RPA solution the same as an AI or ML solution?
That is a great question as well. I'm glad that was brought up. The way I would differentiate the two is an RPA solution makes your current process better, faster, quicker, but it still essentially is your current process, just more optimized. You as the individual recruiter, salesperson, or any industry, whether you're in the mortgage industry, a mortgage processor, insurance underwriter, are still using cognitive skills and making decisions. You're just not having to do mundane, repetitive tasks. With AI and ML, ultimately that next level is reached, and kind of the bridge to get there is the path we're going down now. So no, there is a difference. And while that is more of the great unknown and is still being determined as we speak, what we're proposing today is a way for you ultimately to operate the way you've been operating, to stay in the game long enough to get to that next level that's probably coming soon.
Yeah. So it looks like our last question here today is, can Zia help me get value out of an RPA solution that I've already purchased, but it isn't being optimized right now?
Absolutely. And that's not just for RPA, that's for any set of technology that you have. Some of our biggest and most successful engagements with the customers are what we call a rescue project. And that's where we come in and say, okay, what went wrong? How can we optimize? And how can we integrate more effectively? So that's absolutely something we could do. And I would encourage everyone on this call, if you've tried to roll out an initiative like this and haven't received buy-in, don't give up. Let's approach it a different way together. And I'd welcome the opportunity to do that with you.
Great. I think that's all we have for questions here today. So again, thank you everybody who joined us today. We value that you chose to spend time with us. We know people are busy, and today is a reflection of the fact that hopefully this information is something you needed and is going to be useful for you and your company. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We will be putting this up and sharing the live webinar with you, so you will get access to the link. So look out for that in your email. And also, if you have any quick questions, feel free to reach out to us on our website. We have a contact form right on our website. You can fill that out and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. We're always here to support you and helping you optimize the solutions that you have for your staffing firm. So again, thank you, Matt, for all this wonderful information. And thank you everybody else who is willing to come and join us today. We really enjoyed sharing this information with you. So have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelly. Take care. Bye.